Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at some cards from the Start Deck 100, which is going to be part of our Brilliant Stars set coming out in February, I believe. So yeah, some really interesting stuff to look at here. We also had a few other cards that will also be joining not Fusion Strike, Brilliant Stars very soon. So I'm going to look over everything that we have from Start Deck 100 and the few extra spoiled cards, because there are some super interesting ones and sort of meta warping ones, I guess, in a way as well. So yeah, lots of things to go over. First of all, there are some different art reprints. Definitely some good artwork in here. Look at that green, for goodness sake. But nothing that we haven't seen before. Again, great artwork, but not too much on the competitive side. Some things certainly are worth noting, that there are going to be some cards getting the F regulation mark going forward. It's going to be Boss's Orders, now in the form of Osiris, which I think is now the optimal version of Boss's Orders that you can be running, because I think this looks amazing. Just a quick note on Cyrus. It's one of those things where we had the potential to possibly have a cross-switcher format for a little while and a break from Boss's Orders. But I'm pretty sure the game designers are just making that statement now that having this effect in the format permanently is going to end up being something like a switch or something like that, where it's just very, very frequent. The fact that we're seeing, Crushing Hammer, which has been reprinted over and over again alongside like Energy Switch, Energy Search, and some of the weaker ball search cards, I think these are becoming more sort of evergreen type things. I know some people are kind of against this, and obviously Boss's Orders is an important card in the game, and it does definitely change the game in sort of how it's played and what decks can perform well. Usually lower maintenance decks that have the opportunity to Boss's Orders more often than the opponent is going to perform better than decks that are more focused on having to draw cards to set up in the first place, to then, only use Boss's Orders like once a game. So it does warp the format in its own way just by being available. And that's something that I know some people are against. It would have been interesting with the cross-switcher format, especially with the Arceus V-Star, which could have been a means of tutoring to have Gust on a turn. We also still would have Umbreon, and we would even have the Leafeon VMAX as well. So I think we could have gotten by in the format without a boss for a little bit. But regardless, that's the design choice they've gone for. Boss is sticking around. Let me know if you are happy or sad about that. And in the same vein, we will be getting another Professor card. This is Rowan, of course. He's back, so research isn't going anywhere. Discard 7 is still going to be an element in the game. It's not like the forefront of many decks right now, surprisingly. The Inteleon engine has pushed Rowan to be like a 2/3 of in the Intel builds, sometimes even less if they're Melanie focused. It's very important for Single Strike, but it's not even used in Fusion Strike. So actually in a lot of the top decks, Rowan isn't carrying the game, I guess, but it does just keep that design space open, that everyone has the potential to just dig and see 7 cards and have discard synergy in the game. I know, again, some people aren't happy with this just because the text on these are so simply better than a lot of the other supporters that have been printed, that some won't ever see the light of day. But at least in good news, we didn't get a Marnie reprint, so I'm happy that it's only these cards that are looking to be evergreen style cards, I would guess, as we go forward, similar to Switch as well. I think these sorts of cards are looking like they may just be in format inevitably, almost always. So that's something to note for sure. But let's go on to some new cards, and we'll start with some more trainer cards down at the bottom, and then we'll look at the Pokemon, as I normally like to do. I think there's only a couple to talk about here, just these 3 supporter cards. And the first one is Team Yell's Cheer. Shuffle, let me get this on screen so you can actually see the artwork. Shuffle up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon and supporter cards except Team Yell's Cheer from your discard pile into your deck. Pretty elegant and pretty powerful card, actually, for control. Obviously, going back into deck is important to preventing deck out. And it does mean, this effect actually is similar to Azumarill, but rather than going straight to hand, it goes back into the deck, which means it's much more chainable turn by turn. So if you can focus on some Pokemon's attacks that can recover item cards, potentially for things like Palpad and Crushing Hammer, and these sorts of effects, possibly Team Yell's Cheer will enter the control package as a late game option to just not deck yourself, which I think is pretty important. The one thing that I'm kind of happy about is how important many of the supporter effects are for disruption. Boss's Orders Galamine is a combo. Energy removal from just Team Yell Grunt is really important. So at least this is a supporter effect that sort of breaks that chain. So they are getting punished that little bit here and there to use that Team Yell's cheer to prevent themselves decking, but it's only like every 3 turns, right? So they will get themselves back into that advantageous spot. And I'm genuinely concerned about this card. I think it's very, very strong for control. Because it allows you to stick to like an all basic package of recovery, like Dialgas and the Morpeko that we already have seen, which I think is super strong. And yeah, it even means that you can play more disruptive style Pokemon's attacks, knowing that you have the recovery via this card as well. So just something to be concerned about for sure. Then we have, also something to note is that there is an Eldegoss loop with the new double colorless energy, the twin energy, right? And that is already like replacing itself into the deck, and it already like recovers supporters for you. But this could be another way that you can just stop yourself decking out with the cheerleaders or the Team Yell's cheer. So the Eldegoss loop deck could also be a controlling archetype going forward, just because the twin energy, or what, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a DCE that reduces 20 damage. That is usable with an Eldegoss, so something to bear in mind. Like a Wall Stall could certainly use this sort of deck as well. We've got Draw 3, no one cares. And we've got Marnie's Pride, which is attaching a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Very, very limited, actually. Like, obviously, this is clearly far worse than Melanie for... I guess the upside is that it's universal acceleration, but you don't draw any cards. It's only to bench Pokemon, so you'd also have to find manipulation to get yourself back into the active, and that's 2 very bad things. I think don't undersell the value of the draw 3 that you can get off that Melanie whilst also ramping. So yeah, I think this is likely not going to be a strong card. I think Raihan is going to be that sort of middle ground supporter where it will become that 1 or 2 of. Obviously, Raihan can only be activated on certain turns when you've suffered knockouts previously, but it has so much more upside than Marnie's Pride. So I think these aren't going to do much. I think this definitely has the chance to be an important supporter in the game. But realistically, you know, in terms of looking at these new Pokemon now, there's not too much different in terms of engines or anything like that. It's all going to be what we're kind of playing right now. So let's jump into it. We're going to look over most of the Vs, well, all the Vs, and then most of the other interesting cards. So Zarude doing a 30-30, so it's good old Buzzwole or Landorus or whatever you want to call it. 30-30 obviously is typically like really good tempo. There is a good amount of like 60 hit point smaller things in play right now as well, but it's so consistent for these sorts of decks to go ahead and evolve like straight afterwards that I don't think it's a huge deal. Maybe this can be disruptive in like a Leafeon package against other Inteleon decks to just try and like disrupt their engine that little bit more, but I think realistically it's not going to be super important. And its second attack does 120 and 120 if the opponent's active is a V. Again, pretty good damage output for a basic, really. Assuming most things active will be V Pokemon. If they're non-Vs, that 120 is, again, not a bad baseline, especially when you already have the early pressure pokes. So I think this is like a reasonable card. I am very concerned about Fire once again getting support in this set, though, because there's an Entei, and we also have that Magma Basin Stadium card, which I think is absurd. Acceleration from a stadium is really, really good. So I'm concerned about Zarude V, even though it has like good text. I'm straight away worried about being weak to fire and just being a 2-prizer in general, which is just so easily like dealt with early on by attackers. But I do like the tempo this possesses, and I can see it setting up some attacks, but I don't know really what you're setting up for, I guess. Next up we have Entei. Entei is a spiritual reprint to Suicune, and we'll also see the same thing really for the Raikou as well in the set. Entei has 230 hit points, which is really, really important actually. I think the Magma Basin does deal damage to the fire types, so you actually put yourself down back into Suicune hit points, but if you're using acceleration like Raihan to this Entei instead, being a Toughness Cape 280 hit point Pokemon is actually pretty relevant into the Mew matchup, where you force the extra power tablet or you force them to have the Vit Band committed. So the tankiness of this 2-prizer is really good, and Fire, again, is becoming the place to be now that we have that Basin as a stadium card, which is, again, like I keep saying, absolutely insane. So I love seeing the acceleration there and having like Raihan synergy and all that other stuff. Fire obviously doesn't hit much for weakness. It is awkward being weak to water because not only are there going to be you know, shady dealings Inteleons that could just one-shot you, but there's also even just the Chilling Reign Inteleon, which can do 140 into you as a one-prize Pokemon, and if they can like maintain their bench, maybe they stay out of range or something like that, which could be awkward. So I think there is that kind of going against Entei for a little bit, but I don't think it's a problem necessarily. I think this card is just super good. Probably is going to be what's going to be teeing off early on in the game for your Charizard decks as early tempo potential. You know, as early as turn 1, you could be churning this out if you find Stadium and a means of discarding Fire. And I think that's just excellent, to be honest, because you can use things like researches to try and get there in the opening turn. And yeah, I think this card is really, really good. The additional draw, never a bad thing. And I think this is something that the Charizard needed, actually, the Charizard V-Star. I think it wasn't potentially strong enough looking at the cards right now, but I think having Entei Tempo now really makes me interested in that sort of Fire style deck. So I think Entei will be similar to Suicune in being just like a very, very good card for tempo, draw, and yeah, just being efficient at what it's doing. I'm also going to look at some of the worst cards because now I pay attention to GLC and Cube, and we do these sorts of reviews on the channel now as well. So this card doesn't seem powerful in any of those formats. We have a Simisear, which can do 20 and attach 2 from hand. We don't like attaching from hand really because it's not very reliable. And then 90 plus 30 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active. Again, not very good damage output overall. There are a lot of sort of like vanilla style V Pokemon and Pokemon in general in this set, so just bear with me as I trash a bunch of things, including this Kingler, 220 hit points. V Pokemon, decent hit points there. Bubble Fall, flip a coin if head, search your deck for up to 5 water and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. That's really good ramp. It's on the coin flip though, which no one likes to see. It could be an option just to get like set up turn 1, I guess, and you're really happy when it does pay off because it means you don't necessarily need to be playing like a Frostmoth or something, even with higher energy attack costs in here. You're usually probably going to be powering up bench Pokemon rather than active because you can just get knocked out pretty easily by a lot of things. And you do 230 to yourself, not necessarily good at all. It can't even knock out most V Pokemon, so it needs damage mod here. Then you got Kingler VMAX, 330 hit points, water type, weak to lightning. A little bit sketchy with lightning still present in the game. We have that Bubble Fall again. It's the same effect as the V, but it's not on a flip anymore, but it's super slow to be doing it on an evolved Pokemon. And you have that 240 and dealing 30 to yourself. So really just ruining the fact that you have a pretty nice hit point level just by damaging yourself. And the 240 is not really a big enough payoff here. So even on like coin flip heads turns, like yes, you're consistently churning out like damage, but what's the reason for this? Ice Rider's probably just going to be always better. We have a Staryu, not doing much. We have a Pikachu, 190 hit points, always pretty low. Has 100 plus 120 more if you discard all lightning. Not great. I mean, it can kill a V, but who really cares? We have the other dog here, the legendary dogs, and this time it's going to be Raikou. So 200 hit points is a really, really bad payoff for having just that 1 retreat cost. That's what they've done. They've given Entei 3 retreat an extra 20 hit points than Suicune. Then they gave Raikou 10 less hit points than Suicune and 1 less retreat cost, and that is just not a good payoff at all. 200 is just a worse break point in a lot of situations. But you do at least have fleet-footed, and you have the same Lightning Rondo attack, which again is good tempo. I was trying to debate whether it was worth playing this as like a 1 or 2 of in a Jolteon, or potentially even a Rayquaza if we're going Real Dreamer mode. And I think possibly a 1 of in like both of those decks. Obviously Rayquaza isn't a deck right now, but I could foresee it going into Jolteon as being some like early pressure damage. Because you could easily play like a 1-1 line of Flaffy or something like that to try and pay for the cost. That's where things do get a little bit awkward, actually trying to pay for this guy in Lightning, if you're not playing a Flaff engine. But it could be something that you play just and almost take out the badges of Jolteon and just try and have like a swarm of Raikou, have like your 2-2 Flaffy that just 1 gets into play, and you start paying that way round. But having Speed Lightning and Fleet-footed is a lot of draw in the opening turn, so I like the consistency this can offer. Maybe it could be a Raikou plus like Vikavolt deck, something like that. Just like a Lightning Basics style deck. Maybe some potential there. Because I just think these stats are like all so good and efficient. I don't like the lower hit points, but overall I can sort of live with it. So maybe there's still a home for Raikou realistically. And there actually could be a bit of a fire, water, lightning triangle going on because the new fire stuff really entices me, which gives us a reason to still play like Suicune and Ice Rider and that sort of thing. And maybe that keeps lightning relevant just for being in the mix there somewhere in the top decks. So just something to bear in mind. Next up, we have a Starmie. We do 10 plus 30 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active, and 1 for 60 with free retreat. Good for cube, potentially. Like mid power cube, I think that's good. That's about it, though. And Starmie is actually like a really nice cube card because there's a lot of good, like, an interesting ability Starmies out there to bear in mind. We have a Mewtwo with awesome artwork. I think this is my favorite artwork of the set, actually. Just crazy, crazy good artwork on that Mewtwo, looking really awesome. It has a 20 heal 20 and then 110 for 3. Not really impressive. A Gramble that does 30 and 10 more for each damage counter on this guy. You don't really have many easy ways to damage yourself right now, so very slow to sort of power up. Hoping your opponent hits into you is never really a good strategy. Only 210 hit points, so easy to get through this guy. And then 190 and 30 to yourself, so you can see what they're trying to do with the card, but this is obviously very, very poor. Hitmontop doing a 20 and draw, and then 3 for 100. Very poor. Trapinch, very bad. Vibrava, terrible, but the artwork on this is amazing. You know it's a Kamiya straight away. Then we have a Flygon that's doing the 50 multiplier on a stage 2, rather than the Leafeon that has a 60 multiplier on retreat cost. The upside is you're just requiring 1 energy attachment, and we of course do have Galamine to try and buff this damage, and you are a fighting type, which is potentially decent. With some element of lightning and some element of dark weakness in the game right now. Not a huge amount though. So yeah, and it's a stage 2. So you already know what I'm going to say. We have Purloin and Liepard. Liepard actually a super interesting card. It's a 100 hit point stage 1 dark type that has trade. So this is going to be our next version of Cinccino. Obviously this doesn't have level ball synergy, which is a big downside here. But this can replace Cinccino when it rotates in the summer next year, which is kind of nice. So it seems like they're keeping trade in format as well, which is just an interesting choice. I love this for cube, actually. I think Liepard is in a good range of being sort of tempo-y, mid-range, just cheap and efficient damage with like fairly low hit points. I could see this being in a mid-power cube for sure. And I actually love this for GLC. This is huge for Dark. The one weakness I think of Dark right now, well, maybe a couple of weaknesses for Dark, but the lack of draw engine is painful in Dark right now. So giving it a 1/1 line of Liepard is incredible. So really happy to see that for GLC format. Liepard is going to be broken there. So yeah, excellent card for the game. And it keeps control open as well for players, which I guess is a thing. We have an upgrade to Impidimp in Cube, where you can, or not Cube, in GLC, where you can search for a basic and directly put it onto bench. Then we have a Grimmsnarl, search your deck for a Dark Energy attached to this Pokemon. Sorry, for each Dark attached, this does 30 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Not worth it, way too expensive to actually do meaningful damage. And then Darkness Fang does a vanilla 2 for 110. Obviously not good enough. Pretty big as a card and like efficient in GLC, but the Snipe's just not really powerful enough, I don't think. We have a Morpeko V, which is doing a 30 hit and run for 2 colorless. And we have Hungry Spite, which is 120. If you played a Marnie's Pride, which we've already said is a terrible supporter, you do 120 more damage. So forcing yourself to play bad supporters is usually not a great tactic, just to do mediocre damage. We have an Aggron V. We always love metal types because they have a ton of support. They have extra healing. They have energy acceleration. A lot of good things going for it right now. 230 hit points is pretty big. The first attack, Rock Slide, 90 and 30 to 2 of your opponent's bench. Not great. And then for Metal and 4 colorless, very expensive. 150. If your opponent's active already has damage counters on it, it does 150 more damage. You know, that's not actually terrible. With Intel ping maybe, Zigzagoon ping maybe. That's a lot of damage. Obviously, the attack cost is expensive, and it's annoying trying to juggle, like, the new double colors energy and wanting to play Saucer and, like, a ton of basic energy. So it's probably too much work, but that's actually, like, a meaningful amount of damage, which is kind of nice. The Aggron does 150 and discard the top card from your opponent's deck. Just a minor upside, I guess, you could say. And the VMAX does 270, and you do 30 to yourself. Again, we are slightly concerned about fire coming into this format. It's seeming to get a lot better, so it's actually meaningful that VMAXs are getting smacked around for weakness these days. 270 is a good damage threshold, actually. Again, these attack costs are just too high. I'm almost like taking away 20 damage from these attacks just because I'm expecting a DCE to be attached here, essentially. And the same for this Aggron. Probably too much work, but I like the damage. The damage is a good payoff, I guess. We have an Excavalier, 120 hit points with Miracle Armor. This Pokemon takes 100 less damage from attacks from your opponent's V. So that's pretty annoying to deal with, I guess, for a one-prizer, but still easily achievable, I would say, for most attacking Pokemon. You have Pike, which is a 90 and 30 prod. It's just not worth evolving into this guy basically ever. We have a Zamazenta V with an interesting ability, actually. You're a 220 hit point basic V. Obviously shares the name of Zamazenta, but you rarely actually play 4 Zamazenta V in any deck, so there is potential wiggle room for this to be like a tech one-off straight away and have a split of Zama and keep that trend of Zacian Zam being an archetype. This one has Royal Stance. You can use this ability once during a turn. If you do, your turn ends. Discard your hand and draw 5. So comparatively really bad compared to a Zacian. The only times this is better when you're digging for exactly a certain card for next turn. Like, for example, if Boss is the only card that wins you game next turn, and it's not in your hand, you can just throw it all away for a 2 deeper card dig than what an Intrepid Sword would give you. Most of the time, Intrepid will be much stronger, though, so it trades badly against Zacian, I guess you could say, in abilities. And the attack is Revenge Burst. You do 120 and 30 more for each prize card your opponent's already taken. So obviously a maximum buff of 150 here, so we could go all the way up to 270. Might be knocking out a couple of VSTAR Pokemon, which is maybe relevant actually, because I do think Zamazenta obviously wants to wall out VMAXs, so having this as the answer to VSTARs, although a very late answer, it could be decent, but I think in general Zamazenta just gets way worse if there's VSTARs coming out, so I think in general this is like, I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to give us an alternate option and like an extra answer to a V-Star, which is going to be a big problem for Zam. But I don't think it's going to be enough. I think just in general, Zamazenta V, like the one we currently have in the game, just gets way worse when there could be some purely V-Star attacking decks. Maybe a handful of them at least. We have an Axu, coin flipping straight into a Haxorus. Hello. Great for Cube, if there's any Haxorus gamers out there. I think Haxorus is actually pretty bad for Cube, but anyway, this one can do 160 for 2 and 30 to itself. That is scary. That is broken. Alright, okay. We have Hawlucha attaching from the discard to one of your bench, and crosscut 30 if your opponent's active is an evolution, 30 more damage. Could unironically see this going into Cube. Pretty nice. We have Dramper with the 20 damage, draw 2 for 1 colorless, and then Dragon Pulse doing 160. Discard the top 2 cards of your deck. You hate to see it. This attack isn't strong enough to warrant a downside at all, but there you go. And yeah, that's all the Pokemon we have to discuss here. So I think the sort of star cards to bear in mind, obviously Liepard is going to be one. Probably kept in check by Cinccino just now, but then like when Cinccino rotates, the Liepard can take over and maybe has some synergy with like Piers if that doesn't rotate in time. I need to remember what sets Piers ended up in. He was obviously Darkness Ablaze, but then he also came out in Champion's Path, so maybe he survives rotation. I can't remember the set thing, but that could be a way to like grab Capture Energy plus Liepard, and then you can like start rolling. That could be pretty interesting. But yeah, the Raikou, Suicune, Entei, Raikou Entei, I guess, from this set are probably some standouts. And I think the Zarude is interesting as well, actually. I do like its damage breakpoints, and Grass is not like irrelevant right now. Especially with Leafeon that already has ping damage, I can see there being some sort of line here where the Jungle Rage is just like decent output. Maybe there's something. Maybe it's just good enough to be its own Inteleon deck, and you need more acceleration in here somewhere. Like, this isn't good enough for a Rillaboom deck, so maybe it's just too expensive overall. But I'm always, you know, never sleep on 30-30. It's like typically always good. So maybe we're in a world where, you know, we can do more damage with many other snipers in the game right now, but I'm still happy to see a good bit of 30-30 going on in the game. So then we also have a few cards from Starbirth, which are also going to be part of our Brilliant Stars set to talk about. I'm really happy to see this line of Torterra. I think it's brilliant, potentially for cube builders, because this Grotle could come in and be a very good selling point for other Torterras that we have in the game. And potentially could work its way into like a mid power if you use other Torterras. And it's going to be very good in GLC, actually. GLC currently is using a Sceptile line, and I think this exact Torterra line could end up replacing that, or being a replacement for the Shiinotic, because Torterra has 190 hit points, which is just absurd in GLC, and it does a 50x for each evolution in play, and you could build a grass deck that is Torterra with Grotle, and then you have the Sceptile line that has the Grovyle, and you also have the Shiinotic that could all be in a deck. So you could just use this as like, this is essentially like a Nidoqueen, right? Where you just present a 190 hit point monster, and then you have a 50x multiplier. This is like crazy good in GLC, and grass is already a really good type, so yeah, pretty Exodia, but there you go. We then have Shaymin V and VSTAR. Shaymin V is 190 hit points, just has Wing Flap for 30 for one grass, and then Revenge Blast for 60 and 40 more for each prize card your opponent has already taken. It's reasonable, but it's not like super important, I guess. And then we have the VSTAR. So this is basically just a launchpad Pokemon, and the hit points is kind of low, which is sketch. But the VSTAR has 250 hit points, which is also pretty low for VSTARs from what we've seen so far. But it also has that Revenge Burst. You do 120 and 40 more for each prize card your opponent's taken. And that's pretty powerful, you know. You can go all the way up to, how much are we doing? 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So we can go all the way up to 320, which is a good number, obviously. You could knock out even a VMAX or some VMAXs, or even just set up that damage with other attacks and take KOs on the lot of them. Obviously, this is when your opponent's already taken 5 prizes, and it only takes them like 1 or 2 prizes to be knocked out for the Shaymin VSTAR to be at least 2-shotting things. So I think that's pretty interesting. The VSTAR power would have to be good for me to actually want to play this. And the ability is heal 120 from each of your grass Pokemon. Obviously, it's pretty troll against Urshifu and pretty troll against Jolteon. And actually, your type coverage is good against Umbreon as well. So maybe like the type coverage alone, the fact that you're a 2-prize Pokemon that does reasonable 2 shots into 3-prize Pokemon with the potential late game burst of a 1-shot, I think this is like unerringly like not bad. It feels too fair, and I probably want to be using other VSTAR powers. But the fact that like 1 VSTAR power can like shut down like 2 archetypes in our format right now, like undoing a whole turn of Urshifu or a whole turn from Jolteon is like pretty disgusting, right? It's not actually that bad. When I first saw this, I was like, yeah, I get what they're going for, the late game burst attack, and this is here. But maybe this could just be used as like a 1-1 line in Leafeon already and patch up the dodgy matchups that you have to spread right now. Because I think those are some of the weaker matchups for Leafeon. Or maybe there's this hybrid grass deck that I'm not even thinking of yet, and Shaymin is just a late game sweep in that. I think that VSTAR power is good into some matchups for sure, and I do think those matchups will be relevant in the game. We do have to be a little bit concerned about fire, but at least this is a 2-prize Pokemon. So like you expect to get knocked out by a lot of things, and you're not going to lose straight away if they 1-shot you. So yeah, interesting card, and actually pretty good. I'm more interested in this than I initially thought I was, on just talking out loud of how good these effects are. Because you have that 1-shot potential with not much setup required, like Inteleon ping damage or like Zigzagoon ping damage when it's late enough in the game. And your opponent naturally just wanted to play around this, makes their prize map weird and forces them down different avenues. And Starbloom is good in a couple of matchups, so yeah, obviously this is like metagame dependent. We don't know if there will be all these spread decks. We don't know how important fire is going to be in the metagame. I'm expecting it to be very good because of the Magma Basin, but who knows. Then we have some of the other starters. We have Chimchar, which has great artwork. We have Monferno, and for some reason my thing isn't working. But yeah, the Monferno also has great artwork. And we have an Infernape, bringing back the absolute troll BM effect. I don't know why Fire always gets stuck with this stuff, but here you go. Fire Vortex, 80x. The top 5 cards of your opponent of your deck get revealed. For each energy revealed, discard those energy, shuffle the other cards back into your deck, and you do an 80 multiplier for each. At least you get to shuffle the non-energies back into the deck, which is nice, so you're not just losing random resources. But the more you use Fire Vortex, the less likely it is that you'll have more fires, or you need to spend item cards or whatever to refill your discarded fire energies. So, yeah, you're a stage 2, ton of work. You filter your deck in the wrong way, I guess you could say, because you want to just have more fires to deal more damage. So I guess it's sort of scary out the gate and then gets less scary, or the items that you're playing in your deck are just getting more energy back in anyway. So yeah, all kind of rubbish. And the 160 for 2 is just nothing to write home about. We have a great Piplup making a snowman. We have a Prinplup, and we have the Empoleon here. 160 hit point stage 2. Has that same ability that we saw on a Beedrill a few sets back, where if it's in your discard pile and you have no cards in hand, you can play this from the bench to draw 3. It's actually different from the Beedrill. I think the Beedrill was if it's the only card in hand, whereas the Empoleon is if it's in your discard pile and you have no cards in hand. So very similar effects, but at least this can be live from the discard pile, I guess you could say. So you can play into this in a different way to the Beedrill, where yeah, you can go down to 0. And I think actually going down to 0 is more likely in this format now that we'll have Ultra Ball. I'm pretty sure Ultra Ball is going to be in Brilliant Stars. And that means these effects are more live. I think the draw 3 isn't that big of a deal, but it could be used in an interesting way, just to draw a ton of cards off of, like, nothing. Like, you use this and you use other abilities afterwards to just draw into a bunch of things, but I don't think it's, like, going to be this universal card that we just put into our decks. It just has a 1 for 60 poke. I actually love this card for Cube, and I really like it for high power Cube. 60 sniping is disgusting, and it also has this ability that you can sometimes get it back into play without having to have all these basics. So in high power Cube, I think it's insane. I don't think it's good enough for GLC because Water is blessed and already has way better effects. Maybe you just play this Empoleon and don't play a Prinplup or Piplup in GLC and just try and get it into play, because it does at least have sniping, which is what Water's trying to do, but normally you can do a lot more than just the 60 prod anywhere. And then here we go, the two, actually, well, I guess the one mostly impactful card is this Lumineon V. It is a spiritual reprint to Tapu Lele. It has the same hit points as Lele, which is pretty low in this format now. And it's a water type, weak to lightning, and has a 1 retreat cost. Weak to lightning is actually pretty important because, again, like I said, Jolteon could be sticking around because of this card. And there's also the Raikou potentially buffing some lightning stuff. So giving Jolteon that easy gust 2 prize plus 100 damage like option is kind of a big deal. So just something to bear in mind there. But in general, the Luminous Sign ability we know is very good. Put this Pokemon onto your bench, search your deck for a supporter, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. It's a great escape card if your hand doesn't have a supporter already. You have Quick Balls and Ultra Balls now, so you can improve your odds by 9 cards just by having 1 Lumineon in your deck to get the ideal supporter turn 1. I think this is a big buff to the likes of Melanie style decks that need to hit Melanie turn 1 going second to actually get rolling. I think it could be reasonable in a couple other decks as well. I don't think it's like crazy good. It's not going to be that 3-4 of that we saw in Lele when Guardians Rising came out, because I think we already have enough engine stuff going on, and I think Crobat is a good indication that it's not the be all and end all, especially because it can't be used turn 1 going first now. So I can see this mostly being like a one-off card in decks to improve your outs in the early turns, but also in the late game where it can be your outs to turn 1 boss's orders, now in Cyrus edition. So yeah, I think it's going to be a good card, obviously, and it means that the very little amount of hand disruption that we have in the game, it only gets worse because Lumineon is now going to be that out to win the game. I guess you could say that right now, Eldegoss isn't seeing a huge amount of play in many decks, and I think that's very true, and they do act similarly, but Lumineon has the upside of being that get-out-of-jail-free card on turn 1, whereas Eldegoss only functions as that late-game option, whereas Lumineon is going to almost always be live late game, as well as being that saviour in the opening stages if you're going second. So I can much more likely see it becoming that one-of in decks. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be like dominating the format right now, at least until we see the Inteleon engine rotate. I think then it'll probably be at the forefront of the meta. Then we have Cynthia's Aspiration. Very similar cards actually to Bruno that we already have in the format. Rather than shuffling and drawing 5, you're now just drawing up to 5 in hand. And then if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your last turn, you draw until you have 8 cards instead. Obviously, this is universal, which is really nice. And drawing up rather than shuffling in is sometimes a benefit, sometimes not. So I actually think this is like on par with Bruno for the most part. Don't think it's super insane. Bruno actually has the random upside of being discardable via Tower as well in some relevant matchups. Like Single Strike is a pretty popular deck, so that gives Bruno some bonus points compared to Cynthia's Aspiration. Really happy to see this card in Cube though. It's an extra edition, which is always a good thing to see. Drawing 5 in general is like pretty weak. We've seen that with Karina's Focus, right? Even things playing Octillery basically don't want to play this the Karina's Focus. Like it's only really Malamar that does that. And drawing up to 8 is a powerful effect, but I don't think it really keeps up to par with the things we have in format already. So yeah, that's my thoughts overall. Some great stuff for Standard right now. I'm pleasantly surprised by Shaymin, but I have in the back of my mind that I think Fire is actually going to be insane because of that Stadium card and haven't got to building it yet. Some interesting cards for some alternate formats as well. Let me know if you enjoyed me discussing these alternate format cards, because I know it's only for some people, but it does add an extra dimension for me just going bad, 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 essentially, and then just gushing over like 1 or 2 cards. But it is what it is. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you tomorrow for another video. So cheers.